Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4, back in your life here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Andrew DiCecco joins us right now to talk more about the Eagles as they reported to camp today. And you can check out Andrew DiCecco and Jeff Mosher's full Eagles training camp preview, a 12-part series right now over at InsideTheBirds.com. Who will make the cut? That's our latest edition on the website. Andrew joins us each and every Tuesday and Friday here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. As the Eagles are officially in the building. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hey, Josh, doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing well, and it's even if we don't have games yet, it's good to see people walking in the building, getting ready for practicing, the whole 9 yards. It's just great to see. Before we get anything specific, I want to ask you, what has stood out to you the most as you have prepared for this Eagles season? Is there a storyline? Is there a player? Is there something that has stood out to you the most?
The main storyline that I have going, that I kind of took away going into training camp, and enjoyed a lot of our time. Interesting to see that many, including myself, perceive the Eagles to be in a rebuilding stage, yet they've added a lot of veteran pieces. Granted, some of them are one-year Band-Aids, but they've added a lot of veterans nonetheless to sort of be competitive, because I do feel that they believe that the NFC East is very. See how they assembled the roster, so I'm interested to see how everything sort of comes together in the coming weeks.
Now, one of the guys who did report today, he's been practicing in the building, according to reports, for 2 weeks, is Zach Ertz. And, Andrew, I chalk it up to Zach Ertz is just not a diva prima donna. He's never going to be a guy who's going to try to be a distraction or a problem for the team. So, to me, him showing up is less about whether he plays this year for the Eagles or not, but just being just a responsible professional football player.
Right, and when I was asked that before on the show, I just didn't see him being the kind of player that's going to hold out and cause a distraction. That's just not in his DNA. That's not what Zach has been about since he's been a Philadelphia Eagle. I thought he would show up and be a good soldier, and you know what? Maybe things will pan out and he can go elsewhere, but you know what? I think if it goes the other way, I think just as easily he would be a good teammate and play whatever role they need him to play, quite frankly. And I still think that he has a number of good years left in the tank. Last year is probably an outlier. And, we'll see how things go. I mean, he could also be one of those players that sort of dangled there at the end of the summer when teams are looking to add a weapon and they call the Eagles, see where they're at with Zach Ertz, or maybe the Eagles need depth in other areas and they're willing to explore that because they also have Richard Rodgers there. Let's not forget. So they have some options, but it's not surprising to me that Zach reported.
Do you think this team is better if they have Zach Ertz and Goddard in the 12 personnel, or if they are in 11 personnel with one tight end and 3 wide receivers?
Well, I still think that having the 2 tight end set through the Philadelphia Eagles, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goddard are top 10 tight ends in the NFL. The Eagles receiving corps has the potential to sort of take the next step as far as you have a lot of young players that I think are going to emerge this year in Travis Fulgham and Jalen Reagor and Devonta Smith, but I don't know if they're quite going to be able to contribute at the level that those 2 tight ends would be able to. Not yet. So I think that both of those guys represent Dallas Goddard and Zach Ertz. They represent different strengths, and they have different skill sets that they bring to the table. So I think that they created a lot of different mismatches when you look at what they can do. Zach Ertz being the more prolific route runner, sure-handed guy, and Dallas Goddard being the more explosive of the two, better run blocker, better after the catch, and more of a red zone presence. So I think that they have the best of both worlds with both guys.
Andrew DiCecco joining us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast at DiCecco NFL on Twitter. Andrew, looking ahead also at the offense, obviously one of the big talking points going into camp is the wide receivers and Nick Sirianni, Kevin Petula, all these coaches who have experience with receivers. What do you think is going to be the final number, though, of receivers they keep on the roster? Do they go traditional 5? Do you think they go 6? What do you think the number of receivers is going to be?
Well, as I was sort of doing the math and configuring trying to get inside their heads and the way that they think and utilize some of these guys, it was. I wanted to go 5, but I have a feeling they're going to keep 6 based on just their coaching pedigree. They have a lot of sort of wide receiver-centric coaches with various backgrounds, and I think they're going to be able to get the most out of a player like a J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. So I think that he might be able to stick this year. They might be able to use him as he was intended to be utilized, find a way to incorporate him in the red zone, and really work on some of the areas that really have not been developed throughout his couple seasons. I mean, he's not the only player that has not really developed under the Doug Peterson era, and I think that this coaching staff will be able to at least take away some of the positives, some of the skills that he can bring to the table, and find a way to get him involved. Because outside of Travis Fulgham, they really don't have a reliable, big-bodied receiver. And I'm not saying J. Jaws is reliable, but I'm saying that they drafted him to be that red zone presence. And I think that knowing that, they'll be able to sort of work on some of the things that have been holding him back, so to speak.
Who is the receiver that could take the biggest jump this year?
Jalen Reagor. I think Jalen Reagor is going to be. I think this coaching staff they're going to be far more innovative. They're going to utilize him as Jalen Reagor was drafted to be, the player he was drafted to be. They're going to move him around, get him on the move, find ways to exploit secondaries to get him vertical, let him take the ball out of the backfield, and really just take advantage of his dynamic traits. And that's something that we never really saw last season because he was so misutilized, and some of that was Jalen's fault. Some of that was he didn't necessarily run the most proficient routes, the most precise routes, and his body language wasn't always the best. But I think now with the second year under his belt, every receiver progresses at a different rate. Not everyone's going to come out of the gate swinging like Justin Jefferson. So I think it's far too premature to write Jalen Reagor off. I think that this coaching staff is really going to work with him and sort of scheme to his strengths, and I think you're going to see him make the biggest leap.
In your projections for the roster over at InsideTheBirds.com, you have 4 running backs making the team at this point in time, and I want to know, with that being said, what do you think is going to be done with Miles Sanders this year? Because we know that Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, they both come from offenses that used running backs in different ways, in different setups, but they all have one thing in common. They had a lead back, and then they had secondary third back. So what do you think that means for Miles Sanders and the Eagles offense?
Well, I think there's certainly going to be roles, right? I mean, if you look at how the Colts utilize their running backs, I think he'll be utilized much like how they use Jonathan Taylor. I think he's going to be the early down runner, but I also think that they're going to try and limit his exposure because Miles struggled with injuries last year. I don't know if he can be a 3-down workhorse consistently, but they also have Kerryon Johnson there who can catch the football reliably and probably the best out of all the running backs on the roster. He's also a good pass protector. Jordan Howard's there as a bigger running back, and they have guys like Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell that can do they can be the change of pace guys, like a Naheem Hines was for them in Minneapolis. So they have a variety of players that can fill the various roles, and I think you're going to start to see them sort of lean on certain players in different packages rather than just sort of lean on one player like Miles Sanders to assume the bulk of the carries. Because I don't know that he's that type of player.
Let's flip it over to the defensive side because obviously there's some questions about that side of the ball, and I'm really curious about how this linebacker situation plays out because in your 53, you got 6 linebackers, but one of them is technically Jacoby Stevens, the guy who was a safety, who they're turning into a linebacker.
Right.
I'm assuming, Andrew, that you're going to see only like 2 linebackers on the field at most points in time. I don't assume they're going to have all 3 all the time just because of the way offenses are today. So who do you think the 2 top linebackers should be coming out of camp?
Well, I think it will be Eric Wilson and Alex Singleton. The Eagles still are there's still an absence of talent there at the linebacker spot. I think by default, those are the two strongest players at the position. I think they complement each other quite well. Eric Wilson having more of a higher pedigree as a pass coverage linebacker. They brought him in specifically for those traits. He has a skill set that sort of transitions quite well to the growing trend of today's NFL, and that he's very good sideline to sideline, can drop in coverage, cover the tight ends and running backs. And I think Alex Singleton is more of a well-rounded player who's tenacious against the run, close to the football, very aggressive, piles up those tackles, is always around the line of scrimmage. So I think they'll complement each other quite well. And then after that, it's sort of anyone's guess how that's going to shake out.
Could Devonta Taylor be one of the biggest beneficiaries of having a more normal offseason and preseason games?
Could he? Sure. Do I think that he will? I still think he's about a year away. He was immensely raw when he was drafted. The athleticism is off the charts. Now it's transitioning and channeling that athleticism into becoming a more well-rounded pro player that they can rely on to step in game situations. Because last season he was more of a guy that had these raw abilities, but when you put him out there, they didn't have the confidence to put him out there because he was more like running around like a chicken without a head. In that he was just. You have to know you have to be able to read and react. You have to understand the scheme. It's more than just being athletic. It's more than just finding the football. You have to be able to do so many different things and know other players' responsibilities. And he was not at that level yet, and I still don't know that he will be this year. But I think that this coaching staff is going to sort of look at his athletic skill set and find ways to get him on the field rather than just say, well, he's raw. We'll wait till next year. I think they're going to find specific areas of the field to utilize him and certain packages. So I think he'll make a few more cameos than he did last season.
Now, you have 6 linebackers currently on your 53 projected over at InsideTheBirds.com. The reason I find that interesting is because you also have 5 safeties, and I mentioned Jacoby Stevens, you're listing as a linebacker. That's what the Eagles are projecting him. So why that many guys out there? Do you feel like they're going to have, because you only have about 9 D linemen making this team, so it seems like you believe the Eagles are going to go heavy on the second and third layers of the defense on the depth chart.
Yeah, and again, this is a premature, obviously this is before training camp, so I kind of assess the roster as it's currently constituted, and right now you have a guy in Rodney McLeod who's coming off ACL surgery, plans to play week 1, but should he not be able to be available for week 1, you have to have a contingency plan there. They do have some guys in the back end in the safety spot that have NFL experience that can step in and play a game or two if need be, and Marcus Epps. They have a guy in Elijah Riley, who I think is a young player that's played corner and safety. He played some corner at Army as well and at the Shrine Bowl. So he has some versatility there. I think that he might be able to hold on as the fifth safety. And that's sort of just the way that I see it going. And I went a little lighter on the D-line because you have to remember the rookie, Melvin Williams, can play defensive end and he can play defensive tackle. Teron Jackson's a player that I like, but when you really get down to it, how many snaps are going to be available to him? And would it make more sense to go heavy elsewhere, which in my opinion it would, because the safety depth is far worse than in the trenches. And maybe I think Teron Jackson might be better served on the practice squad and sort of develop that way. I don't know that there's going to be teams vying for his services should he get cut. And I do like his NFL promise, but not this season. I think he still needs to develop in certain areas of his game. So I don't know that you can justify keeping him on and going later at safety knowing the situation of Rodney McLeod.
Andrew DiCecco here, Football at Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Him and Jeff Mosher's full series ahead of training camp, 12-part series right now over at InsideTheBirds.com. Now that they brought in Steven Nelson, my attention goes from the outside corner to the inside. You mentioned that Riley can play both safety and corner. To me, this team becomes better immediately, not just because of Steven Nelson, but because Avonte Maddox will be projected to be the inside corner, and he's so much better to me as an inside corner. But I ask you, could Avonte Maddox also play safety in this defense?
I think so, and I think that that's the plan. I think that you're going to see him move around. I think he's best utilized, best deployed as a positionless type player. he's played pretty sound at safety when he's been put back there, and he's much more at home in the slot. You're right. His skill set does not lend himself to being a perimeter corner. He was miscast, and that was painfully evident early on that he was not cut out for that role. Very short arms, doesn't locate the football particularly well, struggled against bigger body receivers. So I think he's going to be able to utilize the short area quickness on the inside, and he is a smart player. That's one of his strengths. He has a high football acumen, and I think that they're going to be able to take advantage of that and to sort of move him around the secondary, and that's really what he's going to be best utilized at.
The Eagles only have 3 preseason games this year, so no more 4 preseason like in past years, Andrew. How do you think that will impact the final 53?
Well, I think the long shots are going to have they're going to have an even more of an uphill battle to make the roster because there's going to be limited opportunities to really make an impact and catch the coach's eye. So I think that they're being deprived of that 4th game. They're the ones that benefit most out of that. And if they don't make the Eagles, well, you have more film out there on other teams to sort of evaluate you, and you can catch on somewhere else. Now it's going to be very difficult for some of those guys. So I think that they're going to have to go into the preseason really knowing, by and large, what they have on the roster and sort of only have a couple players that they want to get an extended look at. And other than that, I don't know how you can incorporate all the players on the roster right now in these games to be able to get an accurate assessment. So they're going to have to go into these games, but really the first game of the preseason, having tentatively having an idea of what the roster is going to look like.
Andrew, one more before I let you go. Always appreciate the conversation here on Football at 4, here on 97.3 ESPN. What is something that you think is going to be the biggest difference from the Doug Peterson era to the Nick Sirianni era in Philadelphia as we get ready for preseason in just a couple weeks?
I think there's going to be a lot more energy. I think that's sort of going to be very apparent early on. I think it's going to radiate throughout the roster. I think you're going to see a lot of players that sort of emerge and you didn't know that they had these abilities because I think they're going to be utilized to their strengths. And instead of being, like I've said, being pigeonholed into certain roles, I think you're going to see them start to assess what they have and find a way to best utilize these players, play to their strengths. So I think you're going to see a lot more players involved. I think you're going to see a lot more of a rotation, and I think the team's going to be better for it in time. May not be right away, but I do think that this coaching staff has a vision, and I think it's going to be a promising one.
You can follow him on Twitter at DiCecco NFL. Check out his 12-part series with Jeff Mosher at InsideTheBirds.com. And Andrew joins the show every Tuesday and Friday as we are the day of the Eagles reporting to campus today. They're supposed to be on the field tomorrow. So we finally have real football to talk about, Andrew. It feels great, does it not?
Always, man. So I'm always in football mode.
Great stuff, Andrew. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you Friday.
Yeah, man. Take care.